Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us today. This is the second of our conversations on the effects of COVID-19 on regional Australia. My name's Kate Charters, and I'm the chair of SEGRA, which is the acronym for Sustainable Economic Growth for Regional Australia. SEGRA is delighted to welcome you to this second of our conversations, and warmly welcome Robert and Ben and Ryan, who will participate in the conversation today. We're pleased to have been fully subscribed for this timely initiative, but unfortunately, with the format and the number of participants, it won't be possible to have people talk during the panel session. But there is a chat box on the bottom right-hand corner, and I strongly encourage you to use this to have input into both the questions and information about your own circumstances. At the end of the webinar, I'll put together a communique and send that out to everyone, and I'll use that as an opportunity to send out resources and things like that. We'll also review all the comments that come in the chat box, either for future sessions or to put questions to our panelists today. As the pandemic of COVID-19 races across Australia and state and territory governments act to address an unfolding situation, SEGRA wanted to provide a forum where people who live, work and invest in regional Australia could advance the issues impacting on regional, rural and remote Australia. SEGRA, more formally known as Sustainable Economic Growth for Regional Australia, was established more than 20 years ago to ensure a voice for regional Australia. SEGRA is about assisting regional, rural and remote Australia to source and identify the techniques, skills and issues they need to achieve successful economic growth. SEGRA is very committed to the application of policy to place, the need for our ideas to be well tailored to varying place-based needs of our many regional communities, and issues I have been collaborating with Robert Prestipino for the last 5 years. And when he approached me about facilitating a regional discussion looking for solutions to bring our best ideas to the table, we thought a facilitated discussion could be the best way to showcase the varying issues spread across regional Australia. The idea of these webinars is to assist in bringing together key issues and opportunities while hearing firsthand from people tackling the impacts of COVID-19 in regional Australia. In the conversations we intend to offer over the next few weeks, we will give regions the chance to take the initiative and control of their own economic destinies, develop innovative strategies and implementation processes to manage the COVID-19, and identify key decision makers, processes and points of access in government and the corporate sector to engage with. Last week, on Friday, I referred to 2 documents that people may find very useful: Preparing for COVID-19, Tips for Small Business to Prepare for COVID-19, and COVID-19, an Employer Guide that was put out by the Victorian Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Those links are on our website, and Meta will post them at the end of this session so that people can access those. So, Robert, could I throw to you at this point and tell us a bit more about your thinking in this space?
Okay, Kate, as people might be aware, last week we sort of just started the conversation, and what we're trying to do is really just gather an insight to what's happening, because one of the things we're also starting to put together, and I'll just share the screen on this now. Right. Well, I suppose the overview is we're all having this conversation because we know at the end of this force that's coming through, there will be a regional Australia that's different, whether you can say it's a regional 2.0, but the post-pandemic regional Australia is, I suppose, what we're really interested in is there a way that we can understand what's really happening so we can influence the changes in ways that make us stronger instead of weaker. So if that's really the sort of goal we're looking at there, part of the metaphor of building what might be the regional bridge, in a sense of what will be the opportunities we could shape to strengthen a post-pandemic regional Australia. We're really in that phase of, well, let's looking at the sense of if it's got a beginning and an end to it, what might be the shape of the support, what might be the things we should focus on that has the highest leverage. So what we've been doing after the conversations last Friday, we started to map some of the issues and ideas that are coming out around this. And it's looking at some of the issues about economic vitality, supply chain, a number of things have been raised. We'll probably talk about more of those today. But what we've started is a bit of, I suppose, a strategy map to say, well, let's see ways we could sort of group or bucket these issues so we can be sure we're talking across a number of issues. So when we come to actually working out what might be the high leverage opportunities, we get a broad interconnected solution. And one of the things we're using just to, I suppose, theme these is through our work and across regional communities, there seem to be always 4 broad value areas that communities are always interested around: business and employment, and particularly the employment outcomes in regional Australia. We often find too in the communities there's always a concern about education across the demographics and the skills and training opportunities. And of course, the health and welfare part of it and well-being is a really important part as well. And under that, of course, is the lifestyle, which groups a whole aspects of identity and place and the environment. And what we've just started is, and really this is early stage based on conversations from last Friday with the panel, just to see where some of the issues there might cluster and represent different initiatives. So what we'll be doing over the weeks is actually obviously fleshing this out as we get more conversations and input. And it'll be a bit of a tool just to see if we can develop a coherent strategy to work out towards the end of it what would be the best initiatives to help reshape or strengthen regional Australia. So that link, we're sharing that through our resource centre, and it'll be a live link that actually, as content's added to it, this strategy map will evolve over time. The other thing I just might say briefly, I've added to Kate's resource area is what I've called a good news page. It's part of a network of people that are trying to just have areas that talk about the positive stuff the media doesn't coverage. So we're looking at hoping to just have that updated with articles through the next few months as well. So it'll be a space where you can stay calm, stay safe and not panic about information. And also there's, I've sort of put together a bit of a emerging FAQ page on issues and on questions that are popping up sort of globally or across things. So those pages too will be in the resource area, and hopefully they'll have a bit of time to be updated over time. So I'll switch back to you, Kate. That really, I suppose, is the bit I'd like to say today. There is a bit of a way of sort of capturing information. Hopefully we'll make it a bit more digestible as we go through.
Thanks very much, Robert. And now, just before we move on to Ben, we actually have the opportunity to bring a bit of a regional flavour to the an international flavour to the conversation. So I'm just going to ask Ryan Prestipino, who's just back from Norway, what has been his experience in the response to COVID-19. So thank you, Ryan. Great to see you back safely from your travels. First of all, what were you doing in Norway?
So in Norway, my job was to look after and help train anywhere between 70 to 80 sled dogs up in the Arctic Circle in Norway. And yeah, that was a lot of work each day, you know, feeding and the training, but that was, yeah, the main job.
Mm-hmm. Okay, terrific. And so how did COVID-19 impact on the business? Were you a largely online business at that stage, or how did COVID-19 impact?
For the sledding business itself, the only kind of online aspect of it was the bookings. So when it first started, we weren't really seeing much of a result. It was actually when the government was taking action against COVID that things started to really unfold quite quickly, because up that far north, a lot of the roads are frequently closed. So the main access is via airports and the port itself. And so once the cruise ships, that was the first step, the cruise ships were banned. And that was about 50% of the business just instantly gone, because that was peak tourist season up for that area of the country. And so once the cruise ships were gone, we just saw mass cancellations, and we weren't really too sure what to do. And then once some of the airports started closing, luckily the one up north was bigger, so they were incentivized to keep that open. But yeah, I think all eyes just kind of turned to the government then.
And so what did the government do? How did they respond?
Their first initial response was basically an economic one. They said that they had been speaking predominantly with the banks, and that there was a lot of reassurance, saying that, you know, that the talks with the banks have said that the economy is strong enough to look after the people. That was the main thing. And then all of the border closures, all of the things in place to stop the spread was kind of almost secondary. But yeah, making sure that people looked after, anyone that was out of work was being looked after financially, was seemingly the first step.
Terrific. Well, thanks very much for that snapshot, Ryan. And enjoy your last 14 days or 11 days, is it?
Yeah, I've got 11 to go. Yep.
Oh, okay, well, you work online in that time.
Yeah, I will.
Thanks
Okay.
very much,
Thank
Ryan.
you.
Thanks. Now, if I could now turn to you, Ben. Ben is the head of the Centre for Excellence for Regional Economies up in Toowoomba. So I'll leave you to introduce yourself a bit, Ben, and then get you to talk about what's happening in your region or in your space in regard to COVID-19.
Thanks, Kate, and let me know if my audio is playing up or video. But thank you for the opportunity to participate in this this great initiative and to be part of another SEGRA activity. So yes, I'm Ben Lyons, and I'm the Director of the Rural Economies Centre of Excellence, which is a partnership between 4 Queensland-based universities, James Cook University out of the Cairns Institute, Central Queensland University out of Rockhampton, University of Southern Queensland here in Toowoomba, and also the University of Queensland, specifically their Business, Economics and Law School. So we are charged, we're sort of a new research partnership, about 18 months old, that's been working with DAF Queensland as our key sort of funding agency to look at rural economies in Queensland and what can make them go better. And we use a multidisciplinary sort of approach, but really around economic analysis and capability building. So we divide our work into sort of 5 major themes. One of them sort of economic tools and analysis. The other is regional innovation. We look at value chains, and we also look at policy development for regions, and we do a lot of translation and engagement of that, mainly working with local government areas across the state. Queensland's sort of 2.5, nearly 3 times the size of Texas. It's a big place, and having a place-based sort of approach with those, particularly the 3 regional universities in that partnership, gives us an advantage, I suppose, in engagement with regional communities. So I'd have to say that it's been going, well, I would say this, it's been an interesting experiment, but also one that I've been quite proud of what we've achieved in the last sort of 18 months, using the skills of anyone from Jim Cavey, who's sadly now in Tasmania, Jeff Cockfield, who you all would know, through to John Rolfe at Rockhampton, Alan Dale and Harriet Babajan up in Cairns. We have John Mangan at the University of Queensland, who's ex-Treasury. So we've got about 15 research projects on the go, and really looking at the inputs into a regional economy, which is anything from water security, energy, and rural economies in transition with energy. We're looking at beef value chains, which are very important for Queensland. We look at also horticulture and aquaculture. And we're also looking at things like workplace policy and employment, population, and we've also doing some policy at the moment on agricultural investment. A range of other sort of smaller projects, and we've been doing some regional ecosystem, entrepreneurial ecosystem building, particularly out of Goondiwindi, but now also in the Wide Bay, Burnett, and the Northwest Mineral Province. And we've done a little bit of work with Mr. Prestipino at Quilpie, and would like to keep going there in that Quilpie Wellspring project, which is a circular economy concept, which we're very excited about. So that's pretty much about our centre. I'm actually a Chinese literature guy by trade. I went to China and lived there on and off for 18 years. I came back to Toowoomba in 2015 and headed up our local economic development agency. But my bridge in that case was coming back to work with the Wagner family and TSBE on building that Cathay Pacific or freight routes to Toowoomba to Asia. And importantly, we still have one going today. In fact, we still have a Tuesday flight that between 4 and 7 o'clock each week that flies from Toowoomba back to Hong Kong, which is a 747. And I'll talk a little bit about that in the discussion today. So in terms of our region and COVID-19, look, Toowoomba is one of the 16 cities in Australia that has a population of 100,000 people or more. It's pretty diverse in terms of its economy. We're a pretty big service centre, as many would know, servicing the Darling Downs right through to the Northern Territory, South Australia border. Population here of that area is around 250,000. It's about $22 billion economy. We're pretty strong as a regional economy in terms of its diversity, with a few high points being production of red meat. We have 97 feedlots with over 2,000 head of cattle between Toowoomba and Roma, which is about 400-kilometre drive. We then have 4 major processors and an assortment of other minor processors, but 4 major ones owned by multinationals, all large family-owned beef processing plants, which probably produce between, I'd estimate they can have a capability of up to 5,000 head per day between the 4 of them, which is about, or be over 1,000 or be close to 1,000 tonnes per day potential, which is a big part of our economy and also a very large employer. Without the automotive industry now, Australia's biggest employer in manufacturing is red meat processing, with about 420,000 people across the country. And that's no different here with Oakey Beef, John D and Warwick, the Stanbroke Company, and also JBS Beef City. So that's those sort of examples are pretty I suppose typical of Toowoomba, and we have a fairly, and the region, we have a fairly rich history, but also one that's become a little bit littered of late in terms of we've lost Weeses, or the announcement of Weeses, the ice cream factory being moved by Unilever to Sydney or the outskirts of Sydney later this year. I'm not sure now what will happen there. We've also lost our Defiance Milling, which is a big part in the centre of town. And there's been a big history of food processing here, which still continues, but it has progressed a little bit more to the story around the Surat Basin and coal seam gas, as well as food production and that coexistence. And that's sort of been a precursor or the basis of a lot of employment and changes in this region since I left here in the early 90s and returned in 2015. So things like construction and logistics are pretty important to this town. And I think that things like, education and health services are our biggest employer. So pretty much as a town, we have a pretty good basis to get through this crisis. Having said that, the ability to, and being only 120 kilometres from Brisbane, it's sort of too far to commute, but it's also fairly close and handy. I mean, half of the Port of Brisbane on any given day would pass through or now around Toowoomba on the second range crossing. I'd also say that in terms of fruit and vegetable production, and this was the basis of our sales pitch to Cathay back 5 years ago, our diversity with vegetables down in the Lockyer Valley and fruit production down in Stanthorpe and north to Mundubra mean that we can draw a little bit on the region for those sort of things. However, it'll be very interesting in terms of where we go to with this latest crisis, I suppose, because I think supply chains have got to now move as an overarching theme from one of efficiency, which means we're all lean and we've been driving for that for decades now, into supply chains that show resilience and how they can stand up to fast demand and to distribution and we've seen that with things like panic buying of red meat and so forth. Another key issue for us as an economy, I suppose, in the longer term will be how, we export 70 to 80% of what we produce in agriculture in Australia, depending on where you are and depending on your segment. Being inland, we don't have a live aquaculture industry that's been as affected as, say, a Tasmanian lobster or West Australian lobster industry, particularly ones that have been 90% plus exposed to the China market. But we have come off a record year of beef exports to China, which was around 300,000 tonnes last year out of our annual production of around 2 million tonnes of beef in broad figures. How our industry comes back from that, I mean, beef is not as sensitive as the live seafood one or the vegetable one and fruit ones. I mean, the immediate impacts we think of in horticulture around harvesting and labour, and earlier signs are that it's not too bad there in our region. We've got companies like Qualipack down in Gatton there that would employ about 140 people, but typically people Taiwanese backgrounds and students that are over here, out of a total workforce of 150. And also our strawberry production that's ramped up in Stanthorpe in recent years and another apple and grape, or mainly apple production there and pear. That's also quite a large imported labour user. But I suppose the biggest thing when you talk about those specific businesses and those sectors is that we're still coming off a very bad drought. That was the driest, our colleagues here in the Climate Centre at USQ in November last year was the driest or the lowest dew point ever recorded in 100 years, and also the lowest water vapour quantity in 70 years of measurement. We were coming off an extreme and critical water problem for both agriculture and just living, particularly the regions of Warwick and Stanthorpe. How we now adapt to this scenario of, which is changing everyone and changing on a very daily basis, even at a personal level, is going to be a big challenge for all of us. I think particularly the ones that we see affected here is, of course, hospitality. When I think about Toowoomba and hospitality, we have some really interesting businesses here. We're like most regions, we're sort of still trying to develop, and as a part of a regional diversification sort of thing away from agriculture, I suppose, was this tourism dollar, and to arrest some decline in regions looking at tourism. That's really challenged now, and there's the good businesses particularly that can employ sort of 20, 30, 50 people, or and a lot of them are casual people, will be now shut. And when I think about that impact on casualisation, which is 1 in 4 people in Australia now, that's a big impact, and how we address that as a community will be, and in a regional sense, because it's not like you can walk down the road in a region, as we all know, to find other work. Having said that, there is a resources sector that's showing pretty strong resilience and a fairly strong community mindedness in recent days. But again, resources jobs aren't for everyone. I think sort of going back into sort of like how we adapt with businesses and services, like, the immediate reaction is just to survive. I've been involved with a few businesses in the past few weeks and looking, including my own families, and looking at what strategies there are too, and how many you sort of, having been involved in startup coaching, it's a little bit like going from a mature business into a startup situation. And I was saying to Robert earlier this week that one of the aspects around this maturity, or the drive for efficiency that we've had in Australia, particularly over the last 30 years or so, or 3 decades, when you drive for efficiency in a business, typically you actually narrow your customer base. So you might only service a core group of customers that are your revenue base. And if something adverse happens to those few key sort of honeypots, if you like, or revenue providers to your business, that's an adverse outcome. And that's what I think will be one of the issues, just like supply chains, where the resilience piece will come in. So will we now need to look at diversification in our business planning and how we do it? And diversification, like with regional diversification strategies, is an easy thing to say. It's not necessarily an easy thing to do. So if I'm looking through your 4 questions around, you know, what's happening, what are the key issues and impacts, I think, you know, and I think about priorities and what should we do next. I mean, getting businesses moving again, yes, but how we do that is going to be where we need to be creative and really need to think things through.
I might just interrupt there, Ben, because one of the things I was reading during this week, which made a lot of sense to me, and I haven't heard much talking about it, and that is your business continuity plan, and not only to be managing the crisis now, but setting yourself up so that when the crisis is over, you're not so lean that you can't expand up again. A bit, as you said, the difference between startups and more organised businesses. I think that was a really good point you made about that being ready to move quickly at the end of this is going to be quite important. So thanks for raising that.
Yeah. Also, Ben, I got a bit of a question there. What do you think could be the unique opportunity using the resources from the institute or the university where it sits? I mean, as far as the potential for what you think the university could do in these challenging times. Is it going to challenge even some of the operational thinking of the university to be effective, or do you see, what's your thoughts on that space?
Look, I think, you know, as someone that's sort of returned to the university sector after being away from it for quite, you know, nearly 15 years, I think it's a really good time for universities to reconsider their social contract with their communities, because this is a pretty adverse siege-like time, you know, with words around, you know, economic recession or even depression. And you don't want to say those too loudly and publicly, but there's going to be some really, you know, it's going to be a lot of soul searching in communities around how they deal with these, firstly on a personal and family level, but then on your you know, your livelihood level, how we can first of all contain this virus in these next few weeks. What universities can do for that. USQ is pretty in a good place in terms of it has a very, like, in its own livelihood, USQ is one of the larger online and isolation or, you know, distance education institutions. So it is less impacted than, say, our friends at the University of Queensland, which, you know, rely on a significant number of imported and like domestic students on campus. So I think that's you know, that's okay. But what USQ and other universities now do in their communities, I think we need to work. You know, we're a strategic research entity. We need to now become much more nimble and look at like how we can transfer knowledge, how we can look at like quick turnaround in terms of assessment of projects or funding, because the government, as we've seen, is coming out with stimulus packages. What's the best use of those? What is the best place to invest in? Because I think that, you know, we're not a big country, Australia. We're very lucky and we have a great natural resource, but this software issue around how we deal with our people and get them productive again, and how we deal in a no contact or low contact economy will be really interesting. It might actually turn, getting away from the university for a moment, it might actually, and going down a thought is that few of us have echoed, is that it might actually be the catalyst to people getting more online. So there might be, you know, but our digital infrastructure will be tested. Like, we're not quite sure if NBN and other digital providers and our infrastructure is capable. We already know that we have huge issues across regional Australia at times, and we have seen in places like the Barcoo and Diamantina, where Jim Cavey and Selena Ham did some recent research over 3 years, that the provision of fantastic NBN or internet and wireless out there has led to some changes in those communities, and people have adapted it. So it'll be it's going to be a big challenge. I think about places like Tasmania that have lost a lot of imported, you know, tourism and food exports. What's that? And they've got a great model down there of the University of Tasmania being dispersed across the state. There's going to be a lot of need for universities to play a role in their communities. And I think that moving a little bit away from the ivory tower and getting out there would be the key message, I think.
Well, Ben, we've just had a question come in our Q&A box.
Yeah.
It says, hi Ben, regarding diversification, do we need to call for government assistance with this, e.g. REDP? And at what point do we need to flag this with government? Is it possible to get them to think futuristically in a time of crisis?
So when I think about governments or regions and coming up with like assistance, I always think a good idea should get funded. And so I've always been a big fan of place-based regions coming up with their own ideas and having good community engagement behind it, because we can go on for days about examples of top-down versus place-based. I think it is a really good time to get people in government, particularly in state, you know, obviously in state and federal, thinking about regions and listening to regions again as to what their immediate needs are. So I think I'd say yes, but I'd say do some thinking about what you think those things are, and be on the front foot with your ideas. I'm pretty sure Fiona's pretty au fait with doing that.
Yeah. I think community engagement, we talked last week a bit about this, and we've got Jim Cavey coming on Friday, is that building community resilience as well in this particular space. Do you think regional Australia is better equipped in terms of resilient communities, or do you think that that's something that should be a priority for people in this current stage?
So Kate, I think I think we are pretty resilient, but we are lacking in a few infrastructure issues like the digital connectivity one.
Yeah.
And I think that we need to look out for that and see what we can do there. I've seen some announcements from NBN, and if you talk to someone like Jo Palmer at Point of Remote, that great HR remote business she won Rural Woman of the Year last year. She sees it when NBN gets to a town. She sees a big spike in activity. So I think we've got to really push harder to get more spend in that area, because it's very complex, that digital connectivity marketplace, unfortunately.
So in terms of rural economies, if I could just do a bit of a plug for you, you actually on your website put up the research that you've done, and that's quite a useful spot that people might like to go and look at in the course of the next few days. If you just Google Rural Economies Centre of Excellence, it's the first one that comes up. So what other things do you think should be priorities through your region?
In our region, the first priority is going to be well-being of people that are without income, because you may only have no hours on your roster at the local bottle shop because all the pubs have shut, so they've moved their permit. This is a live example down our street. So what those people can do and how they can be secure and safe is my first concern. It's like that old argument about I like paying tax because I'd rather pay tax than put bars on my window. So I think that local sort of securing of jobs, and how we can also the other role of government. And I notice Andrew's got a question there, which I can sort of segue to. I think we need to just secure the basic services and as normal as we can be, and stop a little. We won't. Panic buying is okay. At least people are reacting, but I think we're pretty. Well, I was asked this question the other day about our food supply. We're in a much better place in food supply chains than many other countries in the world, so we shouldn't panic there. But we should be aware of I'm really concerned about hospitality, the food and beverage and restaurant sector around those immediate jobs, because that is a big employer across a lot of regions and urban centres.
Thanks very much. Now, you're going to answer Ben's question about local government and the role that they might play.
Oh, sorry, do you want me to or Andrew?
Yes, no, I was going to get you to.
Look, local government in look, I think definitely they should be pressing their universities to look at some engagement plans and getting the use out of a university facilities. Let's hope it doesn't come to like the ideas around using, say, student accommodation for pandemic wards and things like that in intensive care. Let's hope it doesn't get that bad. That's at one end of the scale. The other end would be the patient piece and knowledge transfer. If I look around at a few people in my immediate vicinity or diaspora within the uni, there's some great knowledge there from production, logistics, climate, business coaching, things like that. There's nursing, as I raised before, like, upskilling of nursing or community care. Like, there's a lot of things, and I think local government, as always in regions, has a big role to play in terms of leadership.
Look, thank you very much. We're about to run out of time, Ben, so I might just close off there, and thank you very much for your contribution and the engagement of rural economies in this webinar series that we're running. For the people who are on line, we will circulate a communique that captures the ideas of today's conversations and the questions in the Q&A box. We also have in the chat box, you'll see a link to our resources site, which includes useful websites for people to access. And if you'd like to contact me directly, my email is kate@segra.com.au or robert@vitalplaces.com.au. We'll have another webinar on Friday when we will be looking at community fabric and resilience. So thank you all again for your participation, and thank you in particular, Ben, for your insightful comments today. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you, Robert. Thank you, everyone.